Tū taua mai I runga, tū taua mai I raro, tū taua mai I roto, tū taua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora ki te katoa. Haumie, huie, taukie.
Kata kata, welcome to day 3 of hearing 9. We welcome here Mr. Hall and you are Mr.
Cathcart.
Mr. Cathcart, yes, welcome. You will hear representing your group of submitters. Mr. Hall, we sort of call you Benson Trust and others as an easy way of describing them. I'd be happy with that. We've read your evidence, thank you for circulating that in advance. You're going to give us a summary of your evidence or perhaps raise some other matters since you've looked at other people's evidence.
Yes, please, and all of the above, thank you so much. If I can, thank you, panel, for the opportunity, but as noted here, representing Benson Farms and others, that's the list of submitters which you have. Mr. Cathcart has prepared evidence on behalf of Benson Farms Limited only on land use capability, and he'll give a summary of his evidence in relation to that, and particularly the issue of LUC4, which is something we want to talk about. So the submitters' properties are all zoned rural production in the proposed plan, so that's the rural production zone is the focus of our evidence today. And the land cover, land use and property sizes vary considerably across the submitters' properties, and I described that in my evidence hearing 1. And I put it in my evidence to this hearing on page 6. I put a map of the submitters' properties. But broadly speaking, there is such small size, ownership pattern, land cover and soil type that rural production would be impossible. And included here is Almarina, the Shooting Box, PSCH Family Trust and Setar property, and Setar actually is on Motumarua Island. Further than this, rural production, be that farming and forestry, would in fact be highly undesirable outcome for these properties. And that's really the main focus of the submissions and the evidence that I'll be presenting today. So before Mr. Cathcart does a summary of his evidence, I'll just quickly outline a couple of things and then return to my summary, if that's okay. So the overview of the evidence, firstly, the submissions, we want to talk about the submissions from Mataka and others, landowners at Mataka Station in relation to the rural production zone. Secondly, the name of the zone as sought in the submissions being general rural zone instead of rural production. Thirdly, the requirement of activities to have a functional need in the rural production zone, and as currently cast in the policies, they don't have a functional need, they're sought to be avoided. For the obligation under rural zone objective 4 for activities to maintain a rural character and amenity associated with a working rural environment. Fifthly, the subdivision policy, talk about a little bit more now. It's number 6, the minimum lot sizes in the rural production zone, and 7, the requirement for maximum separation distance between mining and residential units. So really sort of dropping down from the name of the zone through to objectives and policies down to a rule, and traversing that in our summary today. Just a couple of preliminary things before Mr. Cathcart. Mataka Residents Association. So that group of submitters seek an alternative relief that instead of the special purpose zone, that the rural production zone include provisions to recognise existing resource consents for Mataka. And just to confirm that the preference is a special purpose zone, and we have the panel's minute on that timetable for the presentation of the evidence on that, and I'm supportive of that process. So rather than presenting at this hearing a comprehensive presentation we made by the Mataka Residents Association and others at the special purpose zone hearing next year. That's really all I have to say on that particular one. Then just a point of revision, I suppose, in relation to subdivision provisions. So I had anticipated talking to the subdivision provisions and in the subdivision hearing next year. However, within the limited time available since the issue of the 42A, I have set out in my evidence support for the status quo, i.e. the 20 hectare minimum lot size as a controlled activity. Now, for further discussion with Mr. Cathcart, I'm recommending refinement to this approach to change the 20 hectare lot size activity status to restricted discretionary activity while retaining the 40 hectare lot size control baseline as recommended by the officers. And the 20 hectare restricted discretionary matters would be those of the controlled activity, typical of subdivisions, plus an assessment of the effects of that subdivision on the productive potential of land use capability 1, 2, and 3, i.e. the highly productive land. And so an assessment as to whether subdivision down to 20 hectares and restricted discretionary retained the productive potential of highly productive land. So that's a revision to my evidence where I simply called for a 20 hectare controlled activity subdivision lot size. I think with that, it's okay with the panel. We can hand over to Mr. Cathcart to provide a summary of his evidence.
No, thank you for that summary. And yes, good to hearing more evidence now, Mr. Cathcart.
Thank you. First of all, I set out my evidence, an explanation of what land use capability really is. It's not a rule. All it does is assess the capability of land for sustained production. And class 1 is actually potentially highly productive, very highly productive land and very versatile land. You can use it from a wide range of land uses. As you go from classes 1 to 4, I think the changes most is the versatility of it. The class 2 has limitations. It could be wetness, stoniness, groutiness, whatever. It's something you can't get over, you can't get rid of. It's an intrinsic characteristic. If you can get rid of that problem, fine. But class 4 is the least versatile. And the example I give is a block of gumland, easy rolling gumland country that in pasture, but with pasture on it, you might once in every 10 years, it's a pasture replacement program for a crop of maize or some other summer crop. Because it's wet in the winter, wet right through the spring, it has to be a really short season crop. So this is not arable land, it's purely occasionally you can grow a crop on it. But the best use is really pasture or forestry or some other use. Classes 5, 6, and 7 have no, they have not arable land, they're too steep, erosion, flood prone, used for cropping, wood culture, but generally basic. But again, as you go from 5 to 7, the productivity and the risks involved change. Class 8 has no productive value. And I stress the importance of that versatility because if we're looking to protect this land for production in the future, we're not sure what the future crop is going to be. We're not sure what the markets are. Everyone might go vegan and we're going to produce mainly vegetable crops. So it's important to protect that highly versatile land, which tends to be class 9 2. As I say, getting less volatile as we go up through 3 and 4. I understand from the staff reports that class 4 is a feeling there could be some class 4 land out here that should be protected for putting it almost into the highly productive land class. From my really extensive knowledge of Northland, there would be almost no class 4 land. The only place you might run into it is on the Aipuri Peninsula, where there is some sand country that with horticulture, with irrigation, you can grow avocados, maybe some other crops. But generally, class 4 is highly unlikely to be highly productive land, except in pasture. I think the other thing, and this would have come up, I believe, in Mr. Wood, in his case, is to make sure that the database being used is accurate. And I have surveyed about 20-something properties around the Kirikiri, Waihapa area, and there are three things. The most important one is scale. Existing setup, the database is at a 1 to 50,000 scale. The minimum area you can map at that scale is 10 hectares. And even then, it can be highly variable within the 10 hectares. And so it's important to have a much more accurate database. The second thing is there are mistakes. The team that did the survey in that area, in fact, most of the Far North District, flew in, flew out, and saw the land in one season only. I've been here in the spring, and the hill country looks good in the spring. Come back in another month, and it's fairly dry and barren. So they tend to be optimistic in their assessments. The other thing, this came home to us 2 years ago. We had an extended wet period, something like 15 months of above average rainfall, and we found avocado crops and kiwi fruit dying, even forestry, pine forests are dying, and native trees are dying as a result of wet feet. So these soils are not as free draining as the original assessment suggests. And Mr. Hanmore, who does quite a bit of surveying as well, he and I have found quite a few places where the assessments are just a little optimistic. The other one is there are some complete mistakes, and that's the case of Mr. Woods and 2 or 3 other properties, sort of at Kirikiri area. So rather than saying, sitting in front of the computer and saying, there it is, that says what it is, someone needs to ground truth it. First 5 properties I checked out in the Kirikiri area, a large proportion of them, the topsoil had been removed already, transported somewhere else, and it was just a subsoil there. Now, that should have been visible on a photograph, but someone needs to ground check before making decisions based on what's on the computer. The question as to whether land use capability systems can be upgraded. There are very rare occasions that the handbook, it's the Bible with an all quite expected that says yes, you can, and I'm doing this if only small, and if there is a change to the scheme there, level of protection is changed, some of it could well have a high level of protection, and therefore it becomes more versatile land. Some of it might drop down, so in that case, yes, it can change down. But generally, if it was done right in the first place, those opportunities should have been recognised. But that would be my main plea, is to make sure that the data being used is accurate and is up to date.
Okay, I'm happy to answer some questions now on your evidence. We'll start with Commissioner Watson. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, it's an age-old problem, isn't it? Because what you're talking about is the data that provides the opportunity to determine minimum lot sizes for, for subdivision, and that's based around productivity or the like. And Peter's already said to us, changing the approach, and on the recommendation of yourself to how that's dealt with. And you say at 1.15 in that critical summary about rather than setting a minimum size or height, council may consider measures to assist landowners to amalgamate titles, etc. Because that's one of the problems that we've got, obviously, because if you look at Kerikeri, which is the example everyone throws out, I mean, it's been subdivided to hell. So already people saying the horticultural zone's not appropriate because land's already been subdivided to a degree that we wouldn't have productive use, so therefore we shouldn't have it. Boyd's argument was along those lines. He was assisted pretty capably by a nephew or a daughter, or niece or a daughter, to help him with it. But there seems to be that confusion on that minimum lot sizes. I mean, is it possible to determine a minimum lot size, or is that just completely the wrong approach?
I depend on whether Korea goes to war and the price of our dairy products tomorrow. So that's what you're up against. We went through that with the subdivisions up to Waififi, olive trees were planted. The argument was that 5 hectares in olive trees, established olive trees, was an economic unit. Could well be the price of olive oil at the moment, that might be productive, but that was just a ploy to subdivide the land. If you talk to, now if we're talking of the highly visible land too, for vegetable growing, for example, if you talk to Chapmans or Wilcoxes or those big growers, they talk of 18 hectares. And it needs to be contiguous 18 hectares, not bit scattered around the place. They use big machinery. It's the only way you can economic market garden is to do it on a large scale. Yes, you have your hobby growers, but there's not a big market. Sunday markets not enough to make a living. And so it's a very difficult, what is an economic unit?
And I'm sure you're going to say that you're not a planner if I ask too many questions. It's the normal defence of any technical experts as such. But I mean, if you're following Mr. Hall's idea about providing for having 40 hectares as a baseline, 20 hectares restricted discretionary activity, with the criteria to consider, what's appropriate, and one of those criteria being to be evidence about productive unit or otherwise. I mean, all that's going to do is bring them. I mean, someone will argue the only thing that's going to do is bring the minimum lot size down to 20 hectares because people will always provide evidence of some sort to support that. I mean, where does that sort of system finish up?
That's been the problem. That's exactly what has happened in the past. And that's, you can only go on the markets of the day with the result. The whole of Kerikeri is subdivided to 28 blocks of citrus. Because the whole irrigation scheme is based on citrus. Almost no one grows up there. So that's it's a very difficult argument.
It's hard to know what you're going to base a minimum, what you're going to base subdivision on. I mean, if you don't base it on minimum lot size, it has to be fully discretionary, and there'll always be experts that come along and say, well, most of the land's okay. We should be acceptable for us to subdivide. It's hard to know just what we should follow. If we go then set a figure, whether it's an RDA or controlled activity, that does become the baseline in practice, unfortunately.
I think with a detailed survey, you would be then looking at minimum area of usable.
Yes.
That's up to you. They're going to build a house, you'll know that. Could be a patch of bush, patches of stone, or something like that. How much actual use to be used as a productive unit? That's what they need to show you with that. What is actually usable is the productive unit, not the total unit of property. Because one of the was when Peter was introducing this case here, one of the big issues we face out there now is that farmers are encouraged to fence out their busy bush and that sort of thing, which reduces the usable area of the farm. And they want to do it anyway. What is the productive unit? After you set aside your aesthetic areas, biodiversity areas, carbon sequestration areas, what is the useful area of land that's used for some productive use? And that's what, in applying for consent, they would need to demonstrate that what is left, what is usable, is suitable for growing these particular crops, and base their case on that rather than just basic units.
So that's a sort of similar approach that you might have in a residential area where you're setting a minimum lot size for a house and making sure that there's enough. You've got an area sufficient for a shed and a garage and drive and the sort of view that you're putting forward now, is that common amongst other experts around Northland as such?
I don't know. I've kept well away from plans up to that sheet. But it's what needs to be discussed. The properties I've been dealing with are various sizes. That is the very issue that comes up. That yes, I can make a go of it because, and you talk to farmers, they talk effective area. They don't talk about total area. Unfortunately, a lot of farmers don't know what the effective area is. But once they do, pin it down to that, that really gets them something. So it's effective area. It's important.
Effective area or minimum usable area. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kepka. I really enjoyed reading evidence, and I think it's been very helpful. Me in particular, just put a real lens over things, because we're not talking about like a theoretical subdivision or environment. It is managing that land use. It's an area that changes and needs to be looked after. It's not like an urban area where you pave it, build a building away. It's something that the rural environment is different, and I think district plans. I haven't seen a district plan that captures that method in a way that is going to be useful for people to help in the future. I guess I'm sort of trying to say, what's the answer? Everything that you've said makes a lot of sense to me, but how do we make the plan achieve those outcomes? Should we be requiring any subdivision to have this level of detail that you're talking about, the analysis behind what this bit of land is like, and then what is your plan for, managing it in the future? Particularly that this comment you just made before about how you're going to fence off these waterways, you've got biodiversity areas. I mean, that makes great sense to me, but the plan doesn't really say any of that.
No, but if farmers are required by law now to have that sort of data, that's the sort of information they're required to returns each year to do with carbon, nutrients. They need a farm plan to be able to do that. Most farmers will have that data. Certainly all dairy farmers do, because Fonterra does it for them. It insists that they have it.
That's a farm management plan.
Yes.
Required by?
It's required for nutrient management.
Well, what is the?
It's under the national policy statement for water quality.
How do you then tie that into the district plan? So they're sort of saying the same things.
Well, each regional council in its regional plan will be mirroring what going a step further than what's in the national policy statement.
Yeah.
And that's, you raised a good point with the state relationship between what the regional plan says and how the district council implements it.
Yeah.
And the regional council is required to, in under 12 months, come out with a regional plan for productive land. Yes. Sure whether they're at that at the moment. And then the district councils have to implement that. So it's that relationship between the regional plan and the district plans is going to be so important. So that's one of the arguments that comes up against some of the regional plan restrictions. That if you do that, my property becomes an uneconomic unit. Some of those arguments are quite valid. So that needs to be taken, that the relationship between the two plans and what it does to the potential productivity of a farm and of a district.
And I think everyone needs to be doing the same things consistently, right? Because it's a big jigsaw environment, and someone's doing the right thing here and it's working really well, but everyone over here is doing it differently. So the regional councils mapping to determine highly productive land, that method needs to be consistent with the environment, when it needs to be, that sort of thing. So
Implementation needs to be consistent too. I just went to the rain back and come up through Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa, and through Cambridge, and there's land there that's better than anything we've got in the north going into houses. On the other side, though, you've got land that shouldn't go into houses with floods. That's one of the worries that was discussed with in this part of the district. If there's too much emphasis on one national policy statement, it can be at the cost of other responsibilities of councils. So we want to build on highly productive land. They can build on that little land over there because it's not highly productive. Why is it not highly productive? It's unstable, it floods. So there's got to be that bigger picture look.
yeah, the bigger picture, but then when you come to your own property, it's got to be the same sort of analysis that you do that, all the way down those scales. That makes a lot of sense to me.
But certainly it's Beef and Lamb New Zealand, Dairy NZ, all of those primary industry bodies are promoting farm planning, and there's been a great uptake by farmers. So a lot of the information required, that this whole question of lot size, that's where it's at. Effective, what is the effective productive lot size after you've taken out all these other things you're only required to do?
And I don't think, the district plan is quite blunt, sit there, and it doesn't go into those nuances. Interesting. My last question is, what's the Bible in your list of references? Right. You've got 9 things in your list of references. Which one is it?
It's the Land Use Capability Handbook, 3rd edition. And that came out in 2009. The surveys that the District Council was using done in late 70s, early 80s. And the land use capability assessment has changed since then. That needs to be taken into account. There's more emphasis on versatility. You can look at the was and pathway.
It's number 1 on your list. So that's good. Thank you.
Good morning again. Thank you for your evidence. I too found it really interesting. We're in a state of flux, unfortunately, with our national policy statement. The data I think you're referring to is the responsibility of the regional councils. They are mandated to do it, but they're not doing it because the government signalled that they're going to be a change, and they're saying we're not going to do all this work if you're going to be cutting out LUC3, for example, or changing the criteria. So we're just stuck. But then we have a decision of the Environment Court that says the mapping done in the late 70s, no matter how fit for purpose it was, or accurate it was, are highly productive land. And this is the interim period, which may last a decade, it seems to me. And we, of course, are stuck right in the middle because we've got a plan that was properly drafted before the statement came out. We're responding to that statement as it exists today, knowing full well that it's going to change again, well, almost certain to change again, and probably, hopefully, during the course of this hearing process, and we may have to come back and revisit everything we're actually hearing and having regard to today. So that, that's the hand we've dealt with. And so that means it's a complex, changing dynamic. And I think we just have to deal with the certainty that we have at the moment, and then deal with the change that comes from that. So that's sort of the context that we're living in when you sort of talk about the data and the accuracy. I really, really hear what you're saying, but it's a really dynamic process, which we have very little control over.
The environmental decision has been supported by the policy statement.
Yes.
So that's
Well, that was the implication that came out of that decision,
yes.
was rather than, I must admit, I was the chair of a hearing which adjourned itself to wait for that decision coming out. And we were all expecting the pragmatic approach that Auckland Council had been taking. And we were quite surprised that it took such a sort of black and white interpretation. But what that has led to is, well, okay, if that's how we're going to have to interpret it, we're going to have to change the policy statement. So, but we're yet to see anything come out as to how that's going to be done.
There is a section of the national policy statement where you can argue in case that because this land in reality is not highly productive land, if it is not used for that primary production purpose, that won't affect the productivity of this district or an area. Because it wouldn't have been doing it anyway. So that's the loop. It's not a loop. It's the only argument.
Yes, but that doesn't. But it seems to me that we have different tests for land changes,
Yes.
subdivision, and land use. I can't remember which one that fits into, but it doesn't fit into all three.
That's right.
So you can use that argument in some cases, but not in others, which also seems to be an odd sort of situation because it seems to be the three of them all linked. Land use, subdivision, and land changes.
The other test of getting 2 weeks' time is before the environment. That's one of the arguments.
Right. Would that perhaps be a South Auckland township that started with W?
Yes. So yeah, it's
I'm looking at the chair of that hearing panel.
so that's the. I've done that with reports to the Whanganui District Council and Whangarei District Council. Where we have argued that because this land is not in reality highly productive, if it is, there's no need to keep it for that purpose because that won't alter the productivity of the district or region. It's a interesting argument, but certainly that's what we've encountered around Kerry. For example, you have patches within a property that are not highly productive. And the other argument is that over a certain percentage of the property that is highly productive land, then the whole property is highly productive.
Yes.
Well, it's not in reality because
You run into problems if you allow that sort of fragmentation to happen, because then you could have a lifestyle property in the middle of otherwise productive land, and then you've got the sensitivity issue, a whole lot of that. And I think the conventional wisdom, I'll say it's my wisdom, but the conventional wisdom is that it's better to include unproductive parts and have it in the most part productive and a cohesive land unit property, even though it may contain some bits of unproductive land in it. Do you have a comment on that?
well, that was the discussion that Peter and I were having before the hearing started. That within, it annoys me when you go to Puketoi and here up in this wood sort of on the side of the hill, you've got a huge shed. It's not used.
Glass houses.
No, these
Hydroponics.
big sheds doing their washing their potatoes,
Yeah.
occupying what could be highly productive land. Now, within Kerry area, you can site your support services or put your house or whatever on bits of land that are not highly productive within a highly productive unit.
Yes, okay. Yes, and so I make a point of hydroponic glass houses, which you see
Yes,
around Pukekohe, and they don't use the soil at all. The only benefit that soil is providing is the fact that it's flat.
yes.
And I think there was some, and there's some move, there's a debate going on within that national policy statement about those activities themselves. Anyway, so I'm digressing a bit. I'm actually going to get to some questions now.
You're not digressing in that this is the very question that district councils need to look at. What is this buffer that they need to put around agricultural land?
Yes.
And how will that land be used?
Yes. Because it's the cohesiveness of a farming property, I call it unit, but a farming property that may need to include some unproductive parts to make it sort of functional.
Yes.
I know you don't. For want of a better term. Okay, so look, just understanding, so would it be fair to say that class one and two is primarily about horticulture, because those are the soils that can consistently grow food, plant-based food. That they can still do, beef and lamb.
They're good forestry.
Yeah, but they are best
Yes.
for growing plant-based
They
horticultural
tend
products,
to
right?
be free draining, white
Yes.
soils that you can cultivate in most seasons.
Yes.
Class 3 and 4, you might only be able to cultivate in the spring.
So three's got limited. It's in. Shall we say it's in the zone of highly productive land because it can be used seasonally.
Yes.
Has some constraints that may be able to be made better, but it may just be a seasonal thing.
It
But it
just,
or if you are going to use it for pasture, it's really highly productive, like for dairy land. So class 3 is in Waikato is quite extensive in that regard. Would that be fair to say?
it would be highly productive for pasture up here with organic if it was irrigated. But it may not be as highly productive as some other land.
Yes.
So that's the only difference. But yes, it's that versatility reduces as you move.
And so when you get to 4, it's less about cropping and more about pasture activities being the economic consistent use that you could get in forestry. But
Yeah, certainly in Northland, class 4 tends to be land is primarily pasture, but you might occasionally, some of it, grow a crop as a pasture replacement, but not as a growing a highly financial crop, but because the crop of maize that fits in the farming system. And it's generally one you put in new pastures.
and you said that I think your evidence is saying that in the far north, LUC4 is compromised a lot by wetness.
Yes,
Yes, I got the feeling that was the predominant constraint. Is that correct?
that'd be right, because we have heavy clay soils.
Yes.
That means that the water table fluctuates. In that wet period we had a couple of years ago, it actually got right to the surface, and that's what killed the kiwi fruit and so forth. And it just means that your cropping season is reduced, and you can't grow things like kiwi fruit and the same carrots and so forth. Because
Very seasonal. So it begs the question, and with climate change being a thing, and possibly probably going to get wetter.
that's the argument for protecting your classes 1 and 2.
Yeah, that's going to be my next question is,
Yeah.
are classes 1 and 2 vulnerable to the effects of climate change?
Yes, the coolers will have a little dark.
Right.
But okay, it's
And that then for me, I'll cut to the chase.
Yeah.
If 1 and 2 get threatened by the effects of climate change, does that then potentially elevate 3 and 4?
3 and 4 would be probably a ban. That's
Right. Okay, so
Or they would be solely used for pasture or something like that. But again, if climate change, if we have to reassess land use capability, they won't be plus, some of
Yes.
them won't be class 2.
the whole thing may all be subject to. That's another part of the dynamic puzzle that we're dealing with as well. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
what it does, if you take the example of the SPI, it probably should never have been class 2 in the first place. So 1931, they had 3 metres of sediment put across it by a storm. The houses shouldn't have been in it, but it is very suitable for growing vegetable crops. Doesn't matter if your lettuce or potatoes get washed away in the storm. Don't want your kiwi fruit that's over $1 million a hectare to be washed away. So it's that versatility. Yes, we may have to reassess on discovery because of climate change.
Yeah, so where you have land that's too wet, like class 4 land that's wet, can that be then improved if you have improved drainage? Or is the soil chemistry still going to be compromised?
That's how you make a decision as to whether it goes into class 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Is you are supposed to take into account all known methods of improvement. So drainage is required. I've just done a report for the regional council on the poplar nursery, which is on a soil that you can drain it, but it's still going to be wet in winter. So yes, it is class 3, no matter how much drainage you put in, it's still going to have problems in winter. When you cut the poplar poles and carpet off in winter, therefore it's not a highly
So some class 4 can become class 3 to drain it.
no,
Some
you should
class
take that
can't.
into account when you assess it.
Okay, so if it can be drained, and it should actually be class 3, is that what you're saying?
If it can be drained, you should have, if you put it in class 2, 3, and 4, knowing it can be drained.
Right.
But certainly we have a lot of.
So I suppose my question to you is about the ability of class 4 to become class 3 if you drain, if the class 4 soil can be drained.
If it was assessed properly in the first place,
Well,
it should have been taken into account.
well, we can't assume that, right? Because we know
Oh,
that what we're relying on is data sets back from the late 70s, and the regional council hasn't done their job yet. So we're still, it's potentially going to be the case, right?
you have land on the southern side of Paihia, no one in Victoria Valley, that is shown as class 2. I know that they go underwater 3 or 4 times a year to get to 2 metres with fast flowing water. So you have a problem with the database.
Well, that's my point. Is it seems to me that we've got a lot of evidence that the database is over classifying land, but it's potentially that it's under classifying it too.
I don't know, there's very little that's underclassified.
So you're saying the data set's accurate that way more than that way. This
Well,
way being
what-
1, 2, and 3.
What it
This
boils
way being
down
3
to
and 2.
is that the people doing the surveys came from outside Northern and probably didn't seek the advice of the local people and the local authority that manages the drainage. So their data was all available. So you'll find river valleys throughout the farming district that are shown as class 2 and class 3. That should not be.
And I suppose the corollary, I'll ask the question on the opposite, is if land is too dry, but could become more productive if it was irrigated.
That should have been taken into account.
You're saying that should have been taken into
But
account.
there is a
Possible that's been missed?
proviso there because the original intent, I'm not sure to check on this one, but it required, if it was a community irrigation scheme or a community flood control scheme, and local willing to do it, you'd have to assess it and something low. You might note that if it could be improved with a flood control irrigation scheme. But and if you had to build dams, now a lot of the area around Waimate North, for example, now that there will be storage for water, that allows that land to be used up to its potential, because that was discussed and understood at the time. But there could be parts of the north where either there's no opportunity to store water, that will be assessed. I doubt if there's much that will change.
It sort of seemed to me that the council was sort of being the council officers would be cautious about the potential for class 4 to come to us, and saying, well, and perhaps in the spirit of we know we've got compromised, limited and gappy data, is it better to err on the side of caution until we have better data to work with?
I believe that the data and the advice that is available, local knowledge that is available, will allow them to make the right decisions.
Right. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Look, I was going to ask one more set of questions regarding economics. This is a matter I've sort of wrestled with when it comes to what versatility means and what part economics plays in that decision. And you made the point, well, if South Korea goes to war tomorrow, that has implications on dairy prices. And I think last time South Korea was at war, it rescued the New Zealand wool industry because the American soldiers needed to winter in Korea.
We've got no sheep.
Yeah. But, so the other example is Karaka, south of Auckland. Back in the fourth Labor government took away SMPs, completely destroyed the dairy industry. Those farmers said, well, the economics of dairying has fundamentally changed. The European Union doesn't want our milk and butter. I'm walking off my land and it can become a suburb. Now it's a wealthy suburb of Auckland. But it's still the most productive dairy land around Auckland. Fast forward 20 years and they're importing palm kernel to feed cows on unproductive land because there's no new dairy, because we're giving up so much dairy farming land. My point is economies come and go, but the versatility of the soil, its potential to grow food, does not change, correct? And if that's correct, then how much regard do we need to have the economic factors when making zoning decisions, land use decisions about productivity or uses in productive areas?
That's more to do with the economics as to lot size tend to be more around what size unit will attract investment. Take a region like Northern, not much to be a cash flow about. So you're relying on someone to invest to achieve that potential production, and they need to be big enough units. When you hear Wilcox's and Chapman's talking about 80 hectares, they're also looking at contiguous areas of at least 40 hectares to allow their machinery to. That's the scale. They are the people that are going to invest in this sort of thing. Well, there's not much spare cash out there from local investors. So that's economics that's talked about. But when it comes to if we protect the most versatile, we can then, as the markets rise, and I wasn't joking, I said everyone got into soybeans or something that became vegans. That's the sort of thing that is influencing. Trip down the Mississippi last year, and what was the corn belt? Still called the corn belt with 70% soybean, which is used mainly for fuel and cattle feed. So that's how markets can change. So if the land, that versatile land is available, you can switch to those things. If it's not available, it's really difficult to take the house. We did have a council in Toronto district say one state, we can take that house. So the soil's gone.
So as I say, markets come and go.
This,
but the versatility remains.
That's important.
Yes. Okay. No, thank you. That's a really helpful answer. Thank you for indulging my sort of long-ish questions, but these are questions that are really important to my mind for us that we're wrestling with. And I feel really sorry for my friend over here. Ask some questions.
Yeah, it is difficult sitting in the seat because we're here to talk about zoning, land use, lot size, and it's nice to I mean, with the fellow that goes at here, a lot more that's support. I do, but, yeah. I was after a comment really, if we talk of farm produce or rural produce, I've always referred to the farm, the food basket, and it's massive GDP. So there's that aspect of it. But we talk about productivity, we need to talk profitability. And that is influenced by what you talked about, market forces at scale. Example right now of non-profitable, and yet it's on huge scale, it's gardens. Part of the problem is there's too many of them in worldwide. How do we deal with the productivity and profitability debate?
Make sure you get decent roads to the market. Because that is a large part of it. It's northern here because of its climate. When they were promoting the Kirikiri irrigation scheme, it was pointed out to us, if you took the difference between Henderson and Whangarei and Kirikiri, Henderson, well, Whangarei was 1 month ahead of Henderson, and Kirikiri was 2 weeks ahead of again in the ripening of citrus fruit. And therefore, you've got, and you get that shoulder, that funnel's different again, in that not only is it frost-free and is early, but when you're talking about avocados, further north you go, the less swing you get from year to year in productivity. It's a more consistent production. But it's, yes, we've always promoted them as being able to supply a part of the population on the shoulder seasons. We're not seeing as much of it as we expected. Whether improved transport will mean that products can get better. It's something we haven't really explored far enough yet, and I'm not sure why, whether it is just a transport thing or your lifestyle is too good, rather than efficient.
Well, we supply raw fish. I think part of it is we don't process enough here in the north, which comes back to your big shed on Paihia Hill. The other point you made was some of the best soils already under our towns and cities, Waikato, Pukekohe, Whangarei, Kamo, Kirikiri.
The best soils in Kirikiri are now under those.
So just soils. The other thing, just for our, my colleagues to my right here. So our drainage is a problem up here. I'll come to another couple of things. So we get too wet, too dry, which is one thing. But drainage. So we have our heavy clay, and then we've got our pan soils. It's a silica pan, an ironstone pan, which is a Paihia, flowering, and one white pepper. The definition is water on a pan. Yes. White pepper. Lava flow, which is under that one area, and then we've got the rocks as well, like the volcanic through the highway, through our volcanic. It's been an exciting place to run through back in the day. So there's that aspect of it. My question was, you talked about crop success or failure. You referred to too wet. We've also got too dry, which was referred to climate we can irrigate. What about altitude?
Yes. Some of those things do go together because highest to while it's volcanic, it's also ice plate. But the other thing that those high areas like the Paihia, higher rainfall areas and volcanic soils, those ironstone soils, a lot of the volcanic soils have a higher aluminium content in subsoil. When they become wet, sour, the pH are sour because the pH is dropped. The aluminium becomes mobile and actually poisons plant roots. So those soils, the ground, the Paihia block, the areas are in here, which you know pretty well, they have a very shallow topsoil sitting over top of the bed, lightly style. So the roots start to go, which makes them even more dry summer. So it's that's the effect that I'm more worried about with climate change. That if we get these spells of very wet weather, and those soils become waterlogged, the pH drops, and then we get the aluminium and iron and toxic parts. So that's why we're getting kiwi fruit vines dying. Not only are the roots dying through lack of oxygen, the aluminium levels are risen as well. So those soils are difficult. That's been one of my concerns about the kiwi. That's where I believe some of the animal believes some of the aluminium capability assessments because they didn't understand that at low pH this stuff is quite toxic. And so you're working in a very thin skin on top.
You see that crop photos up no, even I thought it was altitude.
Well, no, the altitude, if you get up on like I said, Tune Moy, you've got two things here. We've got cloud over it for most of the year and over 2,000 millimetres of rain here. But you're also getting salt spray. And that around the northern coast, salt spray can affect some crops like that.
Yeah, so you mentioned the data must be accurate to ground truth. So if we're talking zone and the scale of, and then add in the other productivity, probability issues, how do we actually get ground truth? Given we're here looking at a bit map.
Yeah, that's. I did some ground truthing for the plateau rail. And that was just using your photographs and published soil maps. This is going back to the old DSIR maps, which are better than the new digital maps. And a quick drive through, you can ground truth really quickly.
I'm like either I've wandered around the place, dug a lot of holes. So I know a lot of soils. And you can see it at the roadside.
Yes.
Cuttings as well.
You don't dig a hole if it's a website.
No, or it rains.
And certainly if it happens to be a government sort of try again. It's, you're right, it's got a hard pan under it. That's, I've seen a D8 trying to rip it through. They can rip railway in the bottom.
I think I do have the old DSO rolled up in the shed. I'll bring them.
But certainly, it's not as big a job. At the moment, we have half, I think it's half a person from Landcare Research doing SMAP, which is their new improved, but it's still not at the scale to be usable. And I'm not sure, we started off with, I think, 4 people, go down to half a person.
I was mentioning that hearing days ago that if you 4 or 6 hectare block, you go and dig holes across that, you find 8 different soil types. Hearing. That's the complexity of our schools.
The original soil maps and done yes, I saw before it, they actually set up soil. Taylor was the lead scientist, and areas around Whangarei there, I've seen reports on Iripaka soils, which is one of the best organic soils there. They had 13 variants of it. But of course, you can't produce maps on that. But if you were setting up a fortune, that's exactly what you do. You map it at that detailed scale because you know exactly.
One last question, which Scott here mentioned was aquaponics and some of the scale of our existing lot sizes through that zone. You already well below what is deep, but there's glasshouses growing tomatoes on Access Road. There's a number of little blocks around the place, and there was a theory years ago, probably not long after I came out of university, that small plots would produce more. But you had to work to do it.
If you got into hydroponics or glasshouse, sort of thing, you still face the same problems that horticulture generally faces, but we really seems to. We still don't want some cow property next door spraying these books with 2,4-D, 2,4,5-T, next to your glass house. So you pay, if it's highly versatile, so you want whatever you were using for the horticulture, you just need those same protections. Like the Act saying that you're supposed to retain the effects within your own property. The risk is too high. But
Same for the water source.
yes,
So there was a crop of captions that something is wiped out. That was linked back to the irrigation water.
So you're saying that the glass houses then become the sensitive activity?
that is one of the. This is one of the things I'm sort of looking at with the highly productive soils is how will the council buffer allow you to develop that productivity on soils? What sort of buffer can they put around to stop that productivity being affected? Yes, it could be irrigation water, it could be spray drift, it could be a whole range of things.
Now, thank you for indulging us. It was a long question and answer session, but your answers and the discussion has been really, really, really helpful. So I've been telling it a bit now to jump in there, so I'll hand it over to you.
The risk of coming with Mr. Gagart is that would be too interesting. So but that's hopefully that's of assistance to the panel.
You sort of feel like the band that followed Jimi Hendrix.
Just like, yeah, volume turned down. But if I can just return to those key themes that I wanted to talk about, and I'll skim over a couple of these. I realised that 1 hour into, I'm not sure about time slot, but just
We've actually got quite a bit of flexibility today. So, and that's why we sort of indulged a bit because, you know, we haven't got a full day, so play around with time.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you. So if I can just start with that first topic, and happy to take questions on each of these topics if I go, if that helps. And the first topic was the name of the zone. I think I'm supposed to cut to the chase on that, as you might have read from my evidence. I'm not pursuing that any further. That is the name to be changed from rural production to general rural zone. But I suppose there's some key themes that emerged from that. And one of those is the large percentage of lots within the rural production zone that would be regarded by a measure as being unproductive. And I've looked at the economic report attached to the Council Section 32 assessment, and 79% of parcels in the general coastal zone and is operative, and 63% of parcels in the rural production zone are less than 8 hectares, so below a rural productive size. And I accept the limitations of that sort of data in that it's parcel size. It doesn't say anything about parcels and joint ownership, so there are limitations of the data. Nevertheless, it tells us that there are a large percentage of parcels, or a significant percentage of parcels within the new rural production zone, which would be below a normally rural productive size of 8 hectares. And so that I suppose rings true certainly with my clients' properties, which are of a much smaller scale, again, ranging from below 2 hectares up to sort of 6 hectare average sort of mark in large part. And also goes to the cover of that land too, which is the use for rural purposes. So that was really the basis of that submission point, that the rural production zone doesn't capture in name everything that might otherwise be a general rural zone. And both of those zones are in front of you with the National Planning Standard. But as I say, I think ultimately what's in a name, and it really doesn't matter. If the objectives and policies that follow through are correct and correctly capture what I regard to be the productive land uses proper, but also those activities which are compatible with those land uses and have no productive value, and in some part it would be detrimental to turn land into productive capacity. And then by that I mean that in particular the bush blocks and what have you, which my clients' properties are examples of. So that's as far as I'll take that one. The next one was functional need, again, the rural production policies, and I'm just referring to those policies as they're marked up in Appendix 1.1 of the Officer's Report on the Rural Production chapter, and that's where we've got all the objectives and policies. And functional need comes up in Objective 2 and Policy 5. And Policy 5 is particularly directive, and it specifies that land use be avoided that does not have a functional need. In my opinion, functioning is the wrong test here for activities that may not have to be rural themselves, but are supportive activities or otherwise compatible with rural activities. And I've just noted that the concept of functional need is defined in the plan, it's defined in the National Planning Standard, and it comes from origin in planning terms, comes from infrastructure and coastal planning, etc., where exceptions are made for infrastructure and facilities located within sensitive environments that may be prohibited of other activities. So it's typically quite a tough test and almost a last resort that specifies an environment where things don't happen unless something has a functional need to be there. In other words, there's no really other option for it to be there, such as a port in the coastal area, a culvert in the stream, electricity transmission lines through a wetland, those type of things. So that's really sort of the origin of functional needs as I see it. And so I think where it becomes problematic is where it requires case-by-case interpretation. And the examples I've used are visitor accommodation, which is an activity provided for in the rural production zone, but arguably doesn't have a functional need to be there, where it could be located elsewhere. And just looking at the definition of functional need, that means need for a proposed activity to traverse, locate, or operate in a particular environment because the activity can only occur in that environment. So if you look at something like visitor accommodation, or the other example I've used is rural lifestyle subdivision with environmental benefit, which again is provided for in the zone. It doesn't need to be in that location where it could be located in a other land zone for rural lifestyle purposes. And so I'm suggesting that functional need is the wrong test and seeking proposing that be deleted from those policies. And I'll just also note that the overview section of the rural production zone strikes a better balance here. And that's as set out in the first and it talks about activities, recognise there are both activities with a functional need in the zone, but also a need to accommodate other activities that may occur in a rural environment, subject to them being complementary to the function, character, and amenity values of the surrounding environment. I think that's a better statement of the sort of activities which, when you turn to the activity table and the subdivision provisions, are provided for in the rural production zone. So my markups and my evidence, as I say, seek to delete that functional need requirement. Happy to take questions on that before turning to my next topic on rural character and amenity.
Yeah, okay, I think that might be we'll just start with Commissioner Watson.
Yeah. So with that functional need consideration, which I think mainly comes out of maritime considerations and personal consideration driven, are you suggesting it still be in the explanation, but not a requirement, not carried through into an objective or policy?
I think it,
Like functional need and other activities that may be complementary.
yes, I think it sensibly sits in the policy. In the overview section, but in terms of our markups, and I'll just go to those on page 15 and 16 my evidence. But for the policy, I'm suggesting, so for the objective 2, I'm suggesting rural production zone is used primarily for rural production activities and ancillary activities to support primary production and other compatible activities. So I think within that, it's used primarily for productive activities and other compatible activities. It's inherent in that objective. And then the policy itself, and the reason I'm seeking proposing it be removed is because the policy is an avoid policy, so don't do. So avoid land use that as it's currently granted does not have a functional need. So with that functional need part removed, you've still got that avoid land use that is incompatible with the purpose, character, and amenity of the production zone. It would result in the loss of available productive capacity of highly productive land exacerbate natural hazards, cannot provide appropriate on-site infrastructure. So I think that the balance of the policy still appropriately reflects it, but I think retaining that broad description still in the overview is useful.
Yeah, we can see other difficulties with it when you look at the first part of that, incompatible with the purpose, character, and amenity of the rural production zone. Rather subjective, but yeah, I can see your point on that, so that's fine. Yep, it's useful to have that marker.
Yeah, look, just on that same point, is the issue potentially the use of avoid plus functional in that policy? What if avoid were, I mean, you focused on removing the functional part of that policy. What about if the avoid word was replaced with something else? Would functional then perhaps be less restrictive?
Yeah, yes, and I see where you're going with that. And yes, I agree, and I think that, for example, the zone needs to provide for activities with a functional need,
Yes.
and because that's what it's doing, but that's not
Necessarily
the avoidance of others that don't.
Because I'm just wondering whether it's the combination of those two things, which is probably creating that sort of
Yes, that it's
sort of double whammy,
yes, it is. That's right.
for want of a better expression.
Yes, correct.
Yes, now, at risk of triggering my PTSD, I go back to the unitary plan hearings and the infrastructure section. I remember there was a lot of talk about other words that you could use other than function. And they came up with terms like operational need and technical need. And I'm just sort of wondering whether the term operational potentially offers some possible resolution of the issues raised. I mean, if your definition of visitor accommodation refers to being in areas of coastal character, you could say, well, I've got an operational need to be there because that's part of the definition of my visitor accommodation.
I think in that instance, the visitor accommodation derives a particular benefit from its rural location.
Yes.
I can't see it necessarily as a functional need because it can be somewhere else. Always be somewhere else. And whether it has an operational need, I'm not sure. But I think in part, my answer is that we do, of course, now, since the energy plan, have the national planning standards, which have a definition of functional need. And that doesn't mean to say that it has to be functional need is used. That's the definition. That doesn't say functional need needs to be part of policy. But where it is, that is the definition. So it's not. That's only half the answer, because I think the other part of the answer would be it's not to be functionally, isn't to be used. Would there be something else? But I think it goes to that compatibility with activities that have a primary productive value. And I think that's already captured in the policies.
Yeah, okay, no, that's fair. Okay, right, thank you. Next part.
The next part is rural character and amenity, and this one might just, in fact, be the reading of this objective, and I might be wrong. So, objective 4 of the rural production zone says that the rural character and amenity associated with a working rural environment is maintained. Now, I understand the value in retaining rural amenity associated with the rural working environment, and because that goes to those activities farming activities which can only be environment need to have a certain standard of amenity. There needs to be a lower expectation of amenity, put it that way, to accommodate those activities. So I get amenity, but as drafted, it says the rural character associated with the working rural environment is maintained. Now, I don't know that that's the intention, because, of course, as I said earlier, the rural environment has a wide-ranging character, not by any means associated with working rural environment, nor should that necessarily be encouraged. Coastal, bush, small size lot sizes, there's a wide range of character that's not necessarily working in the environment. And so, again, as written, it would seem to group both the character and amenity associated with maintained. I'm not sure whether that's the intent, but in my evidence there, I sought to, it's a bit subtly maybe, change. That's on page 18, that policy. And I think this does it. And again, it might be in the reading that rural character and the amenity associated with the working environment is maintained. So there might be too subtle a difference, but hopefully you can see the distinction I'm trying to make there, that it's rural character is maintained and the amenity associated with the working environment.
Is it just amenity or is it amenity values?
Probably.
Before it was kind of linked with rural character and amenity, which is kind of rural amenity. How you put out that amenity?
Well, I think on the basis of the amenity is defined in the Act, it's amenity.
Not amenity values.
No, you go to, that's right, not amenity values aren't defined, but amenity is cohesiveness, pleasantness, those type of concepts are in the argument.
Values.
Without the Act in front of me.
I thought you'd be trying to knock out the word working environment.
Well, I can see the.
Where you're going over the wall.
Well, I can see the logic of that for a working environment for amenity, at least anyway, and that's what I mean by that is that if someone wanted to set up a forestry block next door or a farming block next door, that shouldn't be constrained by the adjoining land use seeking a different level of amenity. So I think I'm accepting that in this environment, the expectation is that level of amenity, which is a working rural environment, that could be the expectation, which isn't the highest level of amenity, but whereas rural character is wide and varied throughout it.
And sometimes witnesses fail to appreciate how difficult it is as a decision maker to sort of consider some of these objectives and policies, because they tend to get more generic as they get massaged through the process. Cynic would say they become meaningless, but I wouldn't say that. And with the definition.
Yeah, the Act is amenity values.
And I would add, I've just searched through just this section of the recommended changes. There are multiple references to amenity and amenity values. Just give the plan, council plan some heads up on that. Maybe the access amenity values. I would be consistently referring to amenity values.
I would support that.
Anyway, so let's raise that one. You don't have to answer today. Okay.
So yeah, and just in answer to Mr. Watson's final statement there, yeah, I guess I'm just trying to provide some better definition into this. And as I say, it's a reading of the objective, which might not, my reading might not be the correct reading, but I suppose if I'm reading it one way, others will as well.
Well, it shows the potential difficulty that we haven't started.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just a bit concerned because I looked at rural character and working rural environment. I'm one of those persons in the rural environment. And I'm quite sure that a lot of my neighbours would prefer if I wasn't operating any of them on my jobs and things like that. But there's a whole lot of factors that come into a working rural environment where they're really get this stuff here. I'm not speaking to my dogs. But the whistle and yeah, they do make noise. So I just wonder how much of the amenity value is what is actually real in a rural living environment.
Well, I think
Another example would be tractors. I'm talking earlier, Paul Brothers, Bulldogs. They have a big machinery with their cultivator setting up to plant spuds, onions, carrots, whatever. They go all night.
Well, I think it's that distinction that you're talking about in your own property. I'm saying should be maintained. That there's there shouldn't be a higher level of amenity values. In other words, within the rural environment, there should be an expectation that someone next door can do those very sort of things, the dogs and the tractors. But what does that all actually mean in real terms? It means noise standards, for example, that aren't as strict in the working rural environment than they would be, for example, in residential zones.
Yeah, I can give an example of brothers we were operating, growing spuds on a property in Wellington, and they were going very well, but one neighbour complained they've actually gone completely and left because of that working environment, tractors, noise lights, loading out spuds when they're harvesting, things like that. So, yeah, it's a win for someone who's trying to sleep.
But I think, therefore, my main point here is on the character part, that recognition that the character of the rural production zone is not just a working in rural environment character. It's wide and varied. You don't need to drive around the district to see almost everything, but in some parts, particularly around the clients' properties in Eastern Bay of Islands, so it's not much working rural environment going on.
And then dairy farms, and you see it we work it up here. There often cows are coming in at 3:30 and cups on at 5, so lights. Not a lot of noise in those sheds other than the vacuum pump. But then there's flies, spray. For lime spray for your washing. So
It's worse than tank.
I have a slightly different approach to this, and that is, it seems to me that rural character embraces all of the elements in a working environment, rural environment, good and bad. So rural character isn't just, amenity values are the good things, the nice things, the pleasant aesthetic things that you'd like in a rural environment. Those are your amenity values. Look at the definition. It talks about those pleasantness things, the coherence, recreational things. It's all the good things, right? It's the rose-tinted spectacles that we all take into the working environment when we want to live there. But it seems to me that rural character is recognition that a rural production zone, general rural zone, is an outdoor industrial area. That you have all these industrial effects that Commissioner McNally's been talking about, but also those pleasant characteristics as well. That rural character is the good and the bad, the production effects, but also the tweeting birds and the lovely sunsets and the open vistas. And it's those two things that we need to manage, the real world rural character and the amenity values that we attach, the pleasant amenity values that we attach to it. That's my approach. I might be complete. So I disagree. I mean, I wrestle with what rural character and what rural amenity means, all the time, this role and another role.
I do see it differently. I see amenity as those values that make up pleasantness, appearance, but what it actually means, what it actually means is what is the standard of amenity that you can expect. So
how much do you regulate the effects of those rural activities that make part of rural character in order to ensure that those amenity values are protected? And I think that's where your noise, because machinery at 3 o'clock in the morning is part of rural character, an expected part of rural character, you need to apply noise standards in order to maintain those amenity values. Or you need to apply light standards to stop glare and then sprays and what have you. Anyway, that's
yeah. I mean, I see character as different. It's what you see before you, and that's the.
Well, that can be the good and the bad.
Well,
that could be your bush lots that your clients live on, the regeneration and the wonderful coastal amenity. That's their rural character, but also the places I live.
And I don't think that's it's not an evaluation of good or bad character. It just is.
Yes.
And so it is either openness, it is either forested, it is either a combination of that, or one or the other. It's an assessment of what the landscape is showing.
Just on that point, a lot of landscape features have actually been enhanced by the rural characters like yourself. Just fenced off, quite a wetland and the bush, done that consistently. And if you go around the north, there's a lot of our really natural landscapes that have been retained by generations of the landowners.
Yes.
And that's part of the, well, they have to pay for cost and fortune. Fencing maintenance, weed control, pest control. Yeah, so there's some of the, anyway, it's a little bit of a side, but we've got to be careful about how it was created. Was it man-made? And then what restrictions or positions are putting on it, given that there's a raft of legislation in farming, so mentioned earlier, and was mentioned. Sorry, carry on.
No, that's good. Thank you.
I think we can probably move on to the next, but thank you.
That's good. It's good discussion about a couple of small word changes, but the next one is subdivision policy P6 is again another avoid subdivision that policy, and really this springboards from the evidence of Mr. Cathcart in part, but there are other aspects of it as well. So firstly, the section 42A report recommends the definition of highly productive land is amended, and I agree with it. I think it's a very tidy way to deal with that conundrum you were discussing earlier about this transition state, because it says, okay, for the moment it is as mapped, but it accepts within the definition not needing further plan change, that when it is mapped, then that will supersede the map. So I think it's a very clever and tidy way of dealing with that policy, because the submitters sought the removal of LUC4 from the highly productive land definition. That has happened, but what it's also happened is that LUC4 configuration has found its way into policy P6, and my concern is threefold with that policy, and I'll just go through these. The first one, that inclusion or reintroduction of LUC4 land into the avoidance policy for subdivision. And Mr. Cathcart concludes that LUC4 units, it is assumed that all known technology management practices will be implemented, therefore highly unlikely that any review of land use capability will increase the actual potential productivity of class 4 land to the extent that it is considered highly productive. And so the policy as drafted seeks to avoid subdivision that fragments land into parcel sizes that are no longer able to support farming or forestry, taking into account the potential loss of LUC4 land that is, or it has the potential to be highly productive. And I suppose that the tidy way to say, to summarise the concern with that is it's almost a policy double count. So the capability of the land has already been taken into account in its land use capability assessment. And so that doesn't warrant a further evaluation of LUC4 land, because it may be have the potential to be highly productive. The second concern is the necessity and suitability of the policy as an interim policy in relation to LUC4 ahead of the regional mapping. So firstly, I suppose the necessity of it. So yeah, certainly before land is mapped by the regional council, LUC land, highly productive land, in my view, there's not the significant risk of fragmentation of LUC4 land in the meantime. And in that regard, I consider there are now a very limited number of pathways under the proposed plan that will achieve subdivision rural production zone. And those limitations, coupled with real world limitations in subdivision, on the willingness, costs, ability to access, suitability of location, building sites, environmental site constraints, profitability of the existing farming, mean they don't perceive the same level of risk of subdivision of LUC4 land as identified in section 42A report. And also significant that there, I understand from the section 42A report that's been presented as an interim policy pending mapping. In other words, there's a risk that it might be mapped there for in the meantime. But the problem with that is the wording of the policy is that the policy would remain. And so you would have this avoidance test applying to LUC4 land, even if the regional mapping excludes such land from being highly productive. So you've got a disconnect, you've got a movable or rolling definition of highly productive land in the definition section that will change when the mapping changes, but sort of hard baked into this policy is a requirement to avoid fragmentation of land, of LUC4 land that is or has the potential to be highly productive. Thirdly, last issue on policy 6 is the application, the avoidance policy to rural lifestyle living. And so that's the structure of the policy as it is, says that avoid land that, and then you have to step through each of them. And so C says that fragments land into parcel sizes no longer able to support farming or forestry activities. D says avoid the subdivision that provides for rural lifestyle living unless there's an environmental benefit. And so you've got to achieve both. And by its nature, rural lifestyle living fragments land into parcel size no longer support farming or forestry by its nature. And so I perceive there a problem that would actually means you could never pass that avoidance policy test for a rural lifestyle living with environmental benefit, because by its nature it's fragmented and parcel sizes. Now, an answer might have been to make the rural lifestyle living with environmental benefit as an overall exception. That doesn't quite work because, of course, we can't do that. We shouldn't be doing that. And now you see 1, 2, and 3 land. So my solution is to divide the policy out into an avoidance part and a provide for part. And the avoidance part deals with highly productive land, following the approach of the NPS highly productive land. And the provide for part includes rural lifestyle living where there is an environmental benefit, given the benefits of that, which I think are recognised elsewhere in the plan. So those changes that I've talked about are set out in my evidence, marked up as red on page 24 and 25. Take some questions on that.
Yeah, no, I haven't got. I'm obviously, I acknowledge the issue and thank you for suggesting a way around it. I'm really just interested in how the council officers respond with it. No further question on that.
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose just yes, so that my markups are set out on 24 and 25, and so I'll do look at those in further detail. Next topic is lot size and density, and I guess my approach here is follows one of as required under section 32 of the RMA, an assessment of the risk of acting or not acting if there's uncertain or insufficient information. So the economic report, and by that I mean the foresight and economic report attached to section 32 assessment, goes into detail about the anticipated supply and demand of rural residential, rural lifestyle properties. The analysis stops at 20 hectares. In other words, lumps all 20 hectares properties into one bracket. That's table 38, which I attached to my evidence. So there is not really any evidence from that report, as I read it before the panel, about that band of lot sizes above 20 hectares, which really is the band we're talking about. We're talking about a 20 hectare lot size, and we're talking about what was not 40 hectares. If we're talking about an 80 hectare, 40 hectare lot size in one of the properties that are 80 hectares, in other words, capable of being subdivided. That economic report identifies in general there's no clear relationship between minimum lot sizes in the rural environment zones and the rural property sizes within the district. That is, rural productive properties generally far exceed the minimums of of the district plan as set out in that report. Against this lack of, and also there's a lack of trend data, I suppose, as to the subdivisions which have been granted at the 20 hectare lot sizes. Certainly a lot of focus on smaller size subdivision, rural lifestyle range, but not a great deal of any on the 20 hectare subdivision risk, I suppose. So thinking about section 32 and the question, the risk of not acting, the change from the status quo, which is 20 hectare subdivision as controlled activity. My experience that risk of 20 hectare subdivision is limited because it typically comes with a high cost to implement, requiring large extensive rural roads, etc., to traverse large blocks. And I certainly accept the risk of unfettered rural residential and rural lifestyle development, and the plan certainly deals with that, only providing for that as opportunities where there is an environmental benefit. And so the plan very strictly reins in that risk, as I've described. So there are, of course, benefits to the 20 hectare lot size, which the panel needs to consider. So, you have an economic report in front of you that looks at economics, but section 32 goes beyond just that topic and traverses other costs and benefits as well. So the benefits I've set out in my evidence, including that it retains a rural character, do that word again. In other words, 20 hectares is not urban, nor is it rural lifestyle. And an example of that is, in fact, Martaka Station, where without question it's rural, and it has a dispersed arrangement of houses over that in a very rural environment. 20 hectares is manageable for an owner, although perhaps at the upper end. It provides a suitable land unit where land owners can foster environmental health enhancements. And I think, return to an earlier discussion, it's also a size not to give rise to reverse sensitivity effects. So, unlike rural lifestyle, perhaps buffering up against rural productive uses, 20 hectares within itself provides a buffer. That then turns back to the primary purpose of the zone, which I've commented on above, and without question, the need to apply the strict avoid subdivision regime over FNDC 1, 2, and 3. That goes a long way to achieving the purpose of the zone. However, it's my view that purpose is expressed by the objective policies ought to provide for rather than avoid other forms of subdivision. I'll also point out that there is an 8 hectare discretionary activity allowance for subdivisions in the rural production zone against the current policy consideration avoidance approach. Policy 6 would require a decline of such subdivisions where that fragments landed parcel sizes that are no longer able to support farming or forestry operations. So, again, just returning to that, that may of course be deliberate in the policy drafting, but in my view, offers no recourse for subdivision of land that could not or should not support farming or forestry activities in the first place, and where subdivisions below 20 hectares and down to 8 hectares, but in fact might be a desirable outcome for the land to achieve other stewardship and environmental outcomes. And as I said in my opening comments, I'm proposing a regime that effectively requires an assessment as to the productive maintenance and productive value, just picking up on that discussion. Minimum area of usable land as productive unit for highly productive land, where that is where subdivision occurs down to 20 hectares as a restricted discretionary activity. And the final topic was on a minor thing, on minor residential units, certainly.
About fragmentation and the way I understood it, then is that you're in the rural environment, we can't, under the environmental benefit, we can't pass, you actually won't pass the test to achieve a subdivision.
Yes.
So you've got bush, wetland, whatever. That's fail.
Because the test currently is that it's no longer able to support farming or forestry activity as well. If you have a bush lot, that's an interesting test to apply to that bush lot.
And then you said earlier on, recognising distinct resource consent, you're very specifically about a car and brought up in here. So naturally, multiple areas environmental benefit type land. So there's sort of other response to things out there that we retained and small lots and working farming stuff.
Yes.
So you're saying we've got a problem with that style of development now as well?
I think you've got, it's a good question. You've got somewhat of a problem. I think we've definitely got a problem with that environmental benefit subdivision because you go into a size which is, by its nature, can't support farming and forestry. So definitely a problem with that. With the Mataga style of subdivision, which has a lot sizes with a farm managed over the entirety, you've potentially got a problem because in South, each 20 hectare lot couldn't be regarded as productive.
Okay, then I'll take you back in time a bit to the 90s. Forestry development was quite common, and on some of our land class 5-6 soils, also Canyon, cocoa there, and they were 20 hectare lots, and it was a magical size for an investor. It was a great retirement fund, and now it's tax deductible. So about 20 years, you get tax deductions through that whole period. And so those were all productive and of benefit to the lawyers and accountants and whatever you call them. And in addition, Roger Dickey was running the same thing, retail investment fund. He's still doing it, but he was on smaller lot sizes than today and central. So those forests are still growing. They've been harvested the best ones and still growing. Again, stuff up to 30 years, 35 years later. So
I think what I'm getting to there is in the subdivision section, there's ability to go to 8 hectares as a discretionary activity. Yet as a discretionary activity, that will still be subject to the can it support, is it fragmented below a size that can support farming or forestry activities, and that becomes presumably very questionable at the 8 hectare level. And I'm questioning whether that's the right test to apply to that form of subdivision.
yeah, I agree, because then you look at farm forestry and combination of even growing fruit and all sorts of other things that under the it does happen. I tend to stay out of the soil, but it can be managed. Yeah, okay, thank you for that.
Ready for other people? We got some other.
One more. That's a new topic on minor residential units, which is a very brief topic.
Let's look at that one and see if there's any questions on the subdivision standard.
I think we explored those earlier on.
Just one question for you. I think you said that 20 hectare subdivision could assist with the stewardship of other environmental outcomes. I tried to actually search the word stewardship in your evidence and didn't find it. So I assume that's a comment you brought today. And I'm just wondering, what are the circumstances where a subdivision to 20 hectares could assist with stewardship or other environmental outcome? What are the circumstances that would be?
And I think the phrase I've used in my evidence is community of care, which is used. And so that you find it on the search.
I'm not searching.
So the circumstances are that it provides an opportunity for people to live on the land. And if people are living on the land, then it's establishing a community of care. Mataga Station is an example of this, where the level of pest and predator control, the protection of really outstanding kiwi habitat there, is only really achieved because of the capital injection of subdivision and the sale of lots, and then the ongoing fees paid by the residents into the Residents Association to allow it to provide for maintenance to a higher level than would have been achieved if that were simply to be a farming lot, those conservation outcomes. So it's a 20 hectare subdivision provides a opportunity for people to live on the land and therefore stewardship.
How would that approach Does that approach not consistent with the other provisions that enable subdivision based on environmental outcomes, or are those assumed to be small lots?
Well, I think those are assumed to be smaller lots because typically they're about rural lifestyle and subdivision, which typically is a small. Now, that's not extensively the case because if you go, for example, to the management plan subdivision rule, it allows a minimum lot size, but that's not to say you go to the
So to achieve this within that framework?
You could, if the policies are right, and I think as I say, but you're inherently fragmenting land down to a size which is not necessarily support farming and forestry and ownership.
Because there's obviously the other issues that come with allowing 20 hectares. And I think the theme that comes through in the 42A report of the plan is that the operative plan swung too much to the enabling side of things. There needs to be a rebalancing back towards that, protecting those productive activities and not enabling as much fragmentation. So whilst I think you've come up with a really, really good example of why you would support a 20 hectare subdivision associated with environmental outcomes, there's all these other possibilities that wouldn't use that, but would be enabled. So I was just exploring whether that mechanism is best sort of anticipated within the environment subdivision rule, as opposed to allowing the blanket ability to go 20 hectares across the entire district.
I think in large part the concession I suppose I made at the beginning of the hearing in large part responds to that. That's to say 20 hectares, but with an evaluation of based environment. I think it's important part of it.
Okay, no, good, thank you. Right, now, on and
Right, mine's as well. It's the last one, and it's quite straightforward. So I support the section 42A report. Activity status for minor residential units to be a permitted activity, and it's consistent with how they otherwise provide for other zones as opposed to controlled, which was as notified. My evidence talks about the 15-metre maximum separation distance and includes that's unnecessary, and in some part runs counter to the rule. And what that is, it says that a minor residential unit has to be can be no greater than 15 metres from the primary dwelling. And I've noted my evidence here that there's varied reasons for minor residential units in right rural zones. And in my experience, these include housing for the extended family, including retired people and farm. And that might be a situation where proximity is in fact desirable, but other situations might be through housing for farm workers, property caretakers, and in those circumstances, separation, privacy reasons, in fact, to maintain a degree of independence between occupants is desirable. So, and in addition, on large properties, minor residential units can sometimes be located at the entranceways, and that's sort of caretakers type example, close to sheds, equipment, and not necessarily close to the primary dwelling. So I'm recommending deletion of the 15-metre maximum setback rule. I do note that there are other rules which will mean that rural character is maintained, including that there's only one minor residential unit, that it's no greater than 65 square metres plus garage, and that it shares the same driveway, which is another way to provide a degree of attachment, but without the need for full attachment by way of 15-metre setback. The alternative of retaining a 15-metre setback separation in the rules is to obtain a resource consent where that's exceeded every time. And as I've concluded, that imposes costs on building and something that should be a reasonably straightforward addition to rural properties. I think all that is, of course, against the backdrop of the unfortunately titled granny flat provisions, which we will, again, another thing bubbling under while the panel sits. But again, we don't know what those look like, or in fact, how will they apply to rural properties. That's all yet to be seen. But nevertheless, that's it's the same topic in effect. Minor residential dwelling, 65 square metres. I'm just questioning it's just in relation to 15 metre attachment rule to the primary dwelling.
I thought you might want to put another criterion in there, that they need to have a functional need. That's what-
Well, that is interesting because that, for example, you would have to justify the functional need for the retired farming couple that would work on the land.
I think that separation distance comes as historical provisions, basically, where you were trying to tie MHU to the principal unit.
The operative plan is 30 metres. Yes, it is historical. One thing I see is that it might be a concern about the risk of subdivision. So
That's exactly my question.
yeah, and I understand that, but my answer to that will always be, well, there are subdivision rules, and the subdivision to be assessed.
Yeah, I've worked on a lot of minor dwellings in the rural environment, and different plans have different ways of dealing with them. And when I first saw this 15 metre, well, it's similar to other plans, but it's always been a problem to how you actually, it's really close, and you have to design them so that they're the same look and feel, so that they don't look out of place. I mean, I can understand why that version is here, but I also have worked on many others where the minor dwellings isolate from principal dwelling on the site, and it works well because that's the lay of the land, and it's logical. But I guess I was just sort of playing devil's advocate about whether you should keep something in or not, but because it's a permitted activity, it's a pretty black and white. You jump straight to discretionary. Is it a sledgehammer enough kind of problem? I haven't really got a question. I'm just kind of saying I understand where you're coming from, and I appreciate just deleting it. But is there anything else that needs to go in its place, I guess?
Not in light of the other provision that I think I've identified, which is that they have to share the same driveway.
Yes.
And I think that automatically, that avoids the proliferation of driveways from the main road to service things. So it automatically ties the two together. But I think, unlike other zones, including other smaller rural zones, in the rural production zone, it does become particularly problematic. It's more likely that the minor residential might be used for workers' accommodation or a caretaker's unit, and therefore is desirably located further than 15 metres, the entrance next to sheds or whatever the case may be. So no, I don't think there's a need to add anything in line of that connection by driveway.
I think the driveway part is the most important one, because when you look at the activity status 3 and 4, which is deleting 3 gets discretionary, but then they've gone in the plan 1 and 2 go to non-complying. Should they all be non-compliant? Should they all go together as a non-compliant? You're left with just one in discretionary now, which is just.
Well, I think the non-complying part logically ties to density. So that's good. Okay, so we're starting to get more than one, therefore we're non-compliant, and I understand that as
So that's understanding.
as requiring a proper test. Density 2 is the one minor residential unit per hectare. That's, I think, logically also in the non-compliant land, because it's similar related to density. Sharing a vehicle driveway, well, you can imagine lots of circumstances where, okay, well, yes, we do, and then the driveway diverges. Do we share the vehicle driveway? So that's I think something that should be capable of discretionary assessment.
5 It's the size of it.
Yeah, and I thought about that also. I wondered whether that's, okay, so what's the difference in 66? But I think ultimately I perceive the need for that is around when does a minor residential unit become a unit, become a dwelling? And so I think that size thing points to a more stringent dwelling status.
Yeah, just following up on that, I mean, the whole separation distance thing, I think it's there to avoid the minor dwelling being hundreds of meters on the other side of a large property. And then that being sought to be, wow, it's its own discrete thing. We should allow subdivide lines on a plan argument comes out. And I know the Auckland Council wrestled with that, and the plans that made up previous councils that made up Auckland, including Rodney and Franklin, they wrestled with these things as well. And I think that sort of bundle of provisions was there to avoid, to help assist with that sort of over there and trying something like that. If you delete the separation thing, could that then be bolstered by a very avoidance type subdivision provision relating to minor dwelling subdivision? And again, look to Auckland Council where it's a prohibited activity to subdivide a minor dwelling on the parent lot. If we were to recommend deleting 15-metre rule, would you support subdivision prohibited activity?
I know the policy you referred to, and I know the rule. Certainly, I would support an avoidance policy. But
Yes, the avoidance policy says.
Oh, yeah, so there's the avoidance policy with a non-complying activity around that I support, but prohibited. I always perceive there may be circumstances where that application should be considered by the council.
Right, so you believe that there should still be a wedge.
If you look at that way, but I think
The genuine exception.
well, I think the other difference with this plan is the fact that this final plan provides for a minimum residential density within a lot, and so already you're setting a circus. It's setting up a circumstance where there may be more than one car on a site, and so therefore you are always going to have to rely strongly on your subdivision policies to say actually is it appropriate to subdivide around those or not.
I think the two issues are linked. The subdivision rule for minor dwellings, and possibly the separation. I'll put my poker face for a moment and say 15 metres does seem really close. I think Auckland has 50. I think other jurisdictions, a lot of other jurisdictions, it's 50. Whether we delete it in its entirety, I still have a very open mind to this. Thanks. No more questions on that.
That's the end of the presentation.
Well, again, thank you very much for indulging us in lots and lots of questions as we went. It's really good to have this evidence presented to us. We play devil's advocate in testing your evidence, so it's been helpful to have that discussion today.
Thank you very much for the questions.
And thank you very much for showing up in person. It's always really, really good to have that face-to-face relationship.
Well, timed out, we've come in on the teams.
Well, since you're making it to come up, we're going to have a morning tea break now, so towards.
Thanks.
Sure, coffee, tea, and possibly something to nibble on. So
Thank you.
We drop back.
Nice, appreciate it. Thank you for your time today.
Stop the recording. And mute.